You shared a really interesting Dutch talk show recording with us,
Hmm.
and wow, it covered, well, a lot of ground.
It certainly did. Quite the mix.
So we're about to dive deep into that conversation. It really swung from, weighty global stuff like Ukraine and the Israeli-Palestinian
That's
conflict,
the big geopolitical issues.
all the way through to some pretty specific Dutch societal things and even some surprisingly personal
Yeah,
stories.
a real cross-section.
Think of this as sort of your shortcut to the most insightful nuggets from that chat, helping you make sense of it all.
Exactly. Oh, it's a fascinating window into current discussions. Our mission really is to unpack the key points, add a bit of context, and
Yeah.
help you understand, why this stuff matters.
Okay, sounds good. Let's start with Ukraine. One thing that jumped out at me was this talk about a potential deal.
The deal.
It felt like maybe the expectation of just unwavering U.S. support, the whole leader of the free world idea, maybe that's shifting towards something more negotiated.
That's a good way to put it. The mention of a deal does suggest a subtle shift, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Away from purely unconditional support, perhaps towards something more diplomatic, maybe even, well, transactional.
They even mentioned past financial obligations, like for weapons potentially being waived.
Right. And waiving that debt could be seen as, a pragmatic nod to Ukraine's really difficult situation right now.
So a recalibration.
Possibly.
Yeah.
This kind of recalibration of international priorities could really impact how the conflict develops and any eventual resolution, of course.
And there was talk of a joint investment fund. For Ukraine's reconstruction over the next 10 years, that sounds like a pretty significant long-term thing.
It does. A 10-year fund signals a long-term vision, which, is crucial for Ukraine's future stability.
They also mentioned Ukraine keeping control of its natural resources, which sounds good.
Hmm.
But then came the catch, or potential catch. These side letters, or secret annexes. That always, well, it always raises an eyebrow, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Side letters.
Yeah.
They're supplementary agreements, often confidential,
Right.
and they can change or add details to the main agreement, potentially altering what we think we know publicly.
So less transparency.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They introduce an element of opacity that could hold really crucial details that shape the reality of the support actually being offered.
Okay. And continued U.S. military support was mentioned, around $50 billion.
Yeah, that figure came up.
But with a sort of question mark over how long that continues, which, interestingly, they contrasted with the situation just a couple of months back,
Right.
suggesting a move away from what some saw as a more pro-Russia stance earlier.
And that contrast, it really highlights how fluid things are geopolitically, doesn't it?
Definitely.
This apparent shift in U.S. policy, the rhetoric, it reflects a really dynamic situation,
Yeah.
probably influenced by all sorts of factors, domestic and international.
So $50 billion is huge, but the uncertainty.
Exactly. It underscores Ukraine's ongoing need to lock down long-term support and, the potential for future changes depending on how the war goes.
The discussion then touched on Russia's military situation. The assessment seemed to be, well, slow territorial gains,
And slow progress.
but significant state debt, inflation, yet a military that's still capable of regrouping, renewing itself somehow.
Yeah, what do we make of that combo? It's a striking picture, isn't it? A long conflict, serious economic strain on Russia.
Right.
But while their initial big ambitions clearly haven't worked out, that ability to renew their military suggests, well, a quick end of the fighting seems unlikely.
So a grind.
Probably. The slow gains point to strong resistance, maybe stalemate in some areas. The long-term implication is just a grinding war with huge human and economic costs for everyone involved.
Importantly, though, Ukraine is acknowledged as a sovereign state. Potential EU membership even came up.
Crucial points, powerful signals about Ukraine's place internationally.
Yet there were differing views on whether Ukraine's actually in a weak negotiating position right now.
Yeah, that debate,
Yeah.
it probably hinges on how you weigh different factors,
Yeah.
right? The situation on the ground, the level of outside support, is it consistent, and what everyone's ultimate strategic goals are.
It's a complex calculation.
No easy answer there.
The conversation also looked at how American involvement might be influencing Russia. Like, could a U.S. presence be acting as a kind of deterrent?
That's a key question.
And here's where it got interesting. For another reason, they mentioned valuable resources in Ukraine, specifically lithium,
Ah, yes. The resource angle.
and the potential upside for the IT industry.
This adds, well, a really significant layer of complexity, doesn't it?
Totally.
Strategic resources like lithium. It brings in economic motives that go way beyond the immediate geopolitics. Lithium's key for batteries, electronics, EVs.
So valuable for IT, green energy.
Highly valuable. It shows how these regional conflicts can suddenly intersect with global economic interests in ways you might not expect.
Exactly, and naturally they wondered how Putin might be reacting to all this.
Understanding his calculus is, well, critical.
And this idea that Russia's actions now seem to be facing some kind of conditionality from the international community.
Right. That notion of conditionality,
Yeah.
it suggests a potential shift in leverage. Like, certain Russian actions could trigger specific responses or limits. It depends on Putin's goals and how much risk he's willing to take.
Okay, let's shift gears. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This part of the talk kicked off because of a comment someone made about a past incident, remarks about Jewish people.
Yes, that was a tense moment.
The speaker clarified they meant Jews in Israel, not globally, but understandably it caused a really strong reaction, including from Holocaust survivors.
And that just underscores the immense sensitivity around this whole conflict, doesn't it? And the absolute need for, precision in language.
Definitely.
The fact that Holocaust survivors were affected highlights that deep historical trauma, that heightened vigilance against anything that could even seem anti-Semitic.
The speaker then went on to say that Israeli actions in Palestinian territories involve severe oppression. They used the phrase, treating people as dogs.
Very strong language.
And argued that the October 7th attacks weren't surprising in that context, even suggested Israelis asked for it because of how Palestinians are treated.
Look, those are exceptionally strong, deeply controversial claims.
Yeah.
Framing October 7th, those horrific events, as just a direct, predictable result of Israeli policy, that's a highly divisive view. Many, many people would strongly reject that interpretation.
It's important to acknowledge there are just fundamentally different ways people see the history and the current dynamics here.
Absolutely. Different narratives, different understandings.
On the other hand, there were strong counterarguments emphasizing the brutality of the October 7th attacks. The phrase ritualistic slaughter of 1,200 people was used, graphic details of violence against civilians mentioned.
Right. And that brings us to the core ethical tension, doesn't it? Well, the state's right to protect its citizens versus the profound humanitarian consequences of its response, especially the devastating civilian death toll. The descriptions of October 7th underscore the trauma Israelis experienced.
And the question was posed, are Israel's actions since then, which have led to a huge number of Palestinian casualties, 48,000 was the figure cited, are they justified to prevent future attacks?
A deeply difficult question.
The accusation of genocide against Israel came up.
It did.
But also the legal counterargument, based on the International Court of Justice's current view, that there's no current indication of genocide, legally speaking.
Right. And it's crucial to differentiate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Between the specific legal definition of genocide and broader concerns about, say, war crimes, violations of international humanitarian law.
The ICJ's assessment has a very specific legal threshold for intent.
Exactly. And the practice of warning civilians before attacks, that was mentioned too.
Yes, which is required under international law aimed at reducing harm.
But presents huge practical problems in densely populated areas like Gaza.
An argument was also made that, look, if genocide was Israel's goal, it could be done much faster.
That point often comes up.
The fact it hasn't happened is used as evidence against the genocide claim.
Right. Though, that argument doesn't fully capture the complexities of urban warfare, the potential for unintended civilian deaths in that kind of fighting.
There was also a reference to a West Point military expert's analysis.
Yes, on casualty ratios in urban warfare.
Suggesting a lower civilian-to-military casualty rate in this conflict than is maybe typical.
It's a specific data point people use for comparison. But how applicable it is, how you interpret it in this specific, unique context, that's still very much debated.
Still, the sheer human tragedy was also really emphasized. The desperate situation for civilians in Gaza, nowhere safe to go.
The suffering is undeniable, a critical humanitarian crisis.
And concerns were voiced about the long-term damage to Israel's global image, its strategic alliances.
Yeah, the impact on Israel's international standing could have major repercussions for its future security, its diplomatic ties.
And then a statement was made. Something like, the time when Jewish people would passively accept being slaughtered is over.
A very strong statement.
Which led to a discussion comparing Gaza now to the historical vulnerability of Jewish people, a comparison that some strongly push back against.
Understandably. That historical analogy, while maybe intended to convey resilience, is incredibly complex. It risks minimizing distinct historical contexts and suffering.
Ethical questions were raised, too, about the continuous displacement of people.
Fundamental ethical and humanitarian issues. Displacement raises serious questions under international law about the long-term viability of the region.
And the hostages. The agonizing issue of the hostages still held in Gaza.
Another layer of just profound human tragedy. It complicates any path towards de-escalation.
So clearly, there is disagreement on whether the situation is genocide, even if it doesn't meet that strict legal definition.
Yes, those differing views reflect really deep moral convictions, different interpretations of the scale, the intent behind the actions.
The conversation then pivoted slightly to the rise of anti-Semitism. With contrasting views on how prevalent it is, in the Netherlands specifically, some felt it was maybe overblown, citing low reported incidents in many areas.
Right, looking at the stats.
While others pointed to the need for security at Jewish institutions as clear proof of a real, tangible threat.
Yeah, this highlights how hard it is to really gauge the lived experience of anti-Semitism. Statistics are one thing.
But they don't capture the feeling.
Exactly. They might not fully capture the fear, the insecurity within a community. Those visible security measures, they suggest a perceived need for protection.
True. Comparisons were made to incidents against other minority groups, too, and a distinction between physical and online incidents.
And the impact of online anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't always lead to physical attacks, it can create a climate of hostility, of fear. That significantly affects how people feel day to day.
So the core question remained, do many Jewish people in the Netherlands feel threatened or unsafe right now?
And the answer seemed, well, complex.
Yeah.
Not straightforward.
Okay, moving on from those really heavy topics to some Dutch social commentary.
Right, a bit of a change of pace.
There was an anecdote about young guys on fat tire bikes possibly harassing women.
Ah, yes, the fat bice.
Which led to a discussion about dealing with people who actually film themselves harassing others, calls for stricter law enforcement.
It touches on broader concerns, doesn't it? Public order, safety, accountability.
Concerns were also voiced about a perceived lack of law enforcement sometimes in various situations like demonstrations or protests.
Yeah, public perceptions about the state's role in maintaining order, handling disruption.
Then came a rather unexpected topic.
Okay.
Declining masturbation rates in northern Dutch provinces, according to some surveys.
Flight chuckle.
Right?
I remember that bit.
And it was humorously linked to supposedly lower levels of anti-Semitism in those same areas.
Okay.
There was, understandably, a lot of skepticism about the survey's methods.
I should hope so. That sounds like a pretty lighthearted, maybe satirical take on surveys and drawing questionable correlations.
Definitely felt like poking fun, and one speaker even shared their personal principle of not engaging in self-masturbation.
Right. A bit of personal oversharing, maybe, injecting some levity.
Unfortunately, the tone shifted again quite abruptly. A report about a 14-year-old boy nearly beaten to death by other teenagers.
Oh, that was awful.
With the possibility it was filmed and shared online.
Yeah.
Which is just horrifying.
Deeply disturbing. It raises serious alarms about youth violence, desensitization.
Yeah. And there were also reports mentioned of young people being hired by criminals carrying weapons.
It points to potential failures in protecting kids, the corrosive influence of violence, criminal elements. The filming aspect suggests a terrifying erosion of empathy, a normalization of brutality among some youth.
And the recruitment by criminals, a huge societal problem needing urgent attention.
Absolutely.
There was also controversy discussed around relocating refugees from an asylum center to an amusement park, actually.
Right, on the same day as a local village festival.
Especially because there had been past incidents of unrest. So timing wasn't great.
No.
And there were differing opinions on how the government official responsible handled it and her effectiveness overall.
It underscores those complexities, the potential friction in managing refugee populations, integrating them. You have the need to provide accommodation versus local residents' concerns, especially given past negative experiences. It's a tough balancing act.
Finally, the conversation moved into more personal reflections territory.
Mm-hmm.
A former lawyer talked about their past career, their current media work, the criticism they get.
Right, the public life aspect.
And a past disagreement with a neighbor, specifically after October 7th, highlighting how personal these big events become.
Indeed. It filters down.
They also spoke about possibly trying to get reinstated to the bar after a very long suspension, mentioned past rejections, but expressed hope, citing family support.
It offers a more human angle, doesn't it? The personal toll of public scrutiny, professional setbacks, societal divides. And that determination to try again speaks to resilience.
There were also reflections on a reunion show. Someone got quite emotional, vulnerable about losing a loved one.
Yeah, that resonated. A shared experience of grief was mentioned.
It brings that universal human element in. We also heard a funny recollection of a famous football own goal.
Chuckles. Ah, yes, the classics.
Observations about society just feeling kind of crazy right now.
A sentiment many might share, that sense of rapid change and uncertainty.
And a funny anecdote about Jehovah's Witnesses at the door. Just snippets of life.
Those lighter moments offer a needed contrast, right? Reminders of finding humor amidst serious stuff.
A media figure gave their take on working for a specific news program dealing with criticism.
Mm-hmm. Insights into the media world.
And they strongly condemned the length of that former lawyer's suspension, felt it was disproportionate.
Right, suggesting a debate there about fairness within the legal and media circles.
And joked about maybe getting cosmetic surgery approaching 65. Mentioned some celebrities' recent procedure.
Chuckles, the personal choices people make. Adds a bit of relatable humanity.
We also heard about a football player's surprising diet being the secret to their energy.
Really?
What was it? It wasn't specified in detail in the summary, just that it was surprising.
Oh, okay.
Intriguing. And a really poignant anecdote about Vietnam veterans, the lasting trauma of combat.
Yes, the enduring impact of those experiences.
Which led into a fascinating bit about ethical decision-making in the military, referencing a study suggesting civilians might actually resort to violence more readily than trained soldiers in hypothetical scenarios.
That's counterintuitive, isn't it? It's a surprising perspective on reactions in extreme situations.
Definitely. And a former military leader shared reflections on Afghanistan, finding meaning not in, victory in the traditional sense,
Right.
but in the Afghan people's desire to vote, in standing for one's values, even if you don't necessarily win.
A different way of framing success or purpose in difficult missions.
There was a quick mention of a future personal story someone promised to tell later.
Cliffhanger.
Some lighthearted banter between the personalities, confirmation of a media executive leaving their role after some controversy.
That's sorry.
A quick chat about football management roles, the liabilities, the need for insurance for board members.
Good old stuff.
A funny mention of a banned alcoholic drink for a football referee.
Chuckles. The little details.
News of a media figure returning to a big newspaper after leaving previously.
Interesting.
Discussion about that departing exec's severance package, which some felt was excessive.
That always sparks debate.
Comparisons between a young football talent and, inevitably, Lionel Messi.
The ultimate comparison.
And observations about that young player's social media presence, before they finally wrapped up with quick goodbyes and scheduling notes.
Wow. So, quite a journey through just one conversation.
Absolutely. This one talk show, it really touched on an incredibly wide range of things, shows how interconnected everything is, global events, social issues, individual lives.
It really does.
So just to recap for you listening, we've taken a deep dive into the complexities of conflicts like Ukraine and the Israeli-Palestinian situation. We explored very different viewpoints on that deeply sensitive issue. We got a glimpse into some current Dutch social debates, the serious and the less serious.
Right.
And heard a whole bunch of personal stories, resilience, reflection, grief, humor.
And what really stands out, I think, is just the sheer diversity of viewpoints shared. And the fact that there are no easy solutions, no simple answers to so many of these challenges.
Exactly. It mirrors the real world, doesn't it? The multifaceted nature of it all.
It truly does.
Absolutely. And, well, that brings us to you, the listener. We really encourage you to think about the different angles, the perspectives we've unpacked today.
Yeah. What sparked your curiosity the most? Which of these topics or maybe which viewpoint really resonated with you or made you think?
Our final thought for you to maybe mull over is this. In a world just saturated with information, sometimes taking the time to really dig into the nuances of even a single sprawling conversation like this one, it can reveal surprising connections, deeper complexities, and hopefully lead to a richer understanding of the forces shaping our world.
So the question is, what other seemingly unrelated discussions out there might actually hold unexpected insights if we just listen closely enough?